Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape that is quite literally redefining the world as we know it. We're going to put two totally different blueprints for the future side by side. On one hand, you've got China's established massive infrastructure dominance, and on the other, India's incredibly fast emerging digital and development strategy. It's a fascinating macroeconomic puzzle, and we've got the data to break it all down for you. So let's jump right in.
We've organized this into 6 quick sections for you today. 1. China's global power strategy. 2. Manufacturing and mineral dominance. 3. India's multi-alignment and growth. 4. The sovereign AI race. 5. Future of the global order. And finally, 6. Lessons for the next decade.
Okay, Section 1, China's global power strategy. Let's start by looking at China's massive physical ambition. The absolute bedrock of Beijing's global strategy is the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. Launched just over a decade ago, this has been a monumental, historic push to build hard infrastructure. We're talking railways, highways, and massive deep water ports. The ultimate goal here? To drastically deepen maritime and overland connectivity across Eurasia, Africa, and the Asia-Pacific. It is, literally, a project to completely rewire global trade routes, connecting the factories of the East with the markets of the West. Honestly, we haven't seen anything quite like this since the ancient Silk Road.
Now, when we break down where Beijing is actually putting its money, a really clear pattern emerges. While the BRI started out with a really heavy focus on Central Asia, it's definitely pivoted. Today, there's a massive priority placed on critical maritime and trade routes. Look at the numbers: 131 projects currently in Southeast Asia and 91 in South Asia. This isn't just about building roads for the sake of development, right? It's about securing those vital physical shipping lanes that Chinese imports and exports fundamentally depend on to keep their entire economic engine running. Now, you really can't talk about the Belt and Road Initiative without addressing the famous debt trap debate. But we need to look at this neutrally, leaning strictly on empirical research rather than, political talking points. Western capitals often point to isolated cases, like the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, as proof that China is trying to seize assets for strategic leverage. But broader empirical studies suggest something far more nuanced. Widespread intentional debt trapping just isn't conclusively proven across the board. In fact, China is actually facing its own severe economic blowback from these loans. They're dealing with huge debt burdens from those early years of unregulated investments in countries that are now facing serious economic distress. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. Moving on to Section 2, Manufacturing and Mineral Dominance. Let's see how all this physical infrastructure pairs with a strategic chokehold on modern supply chains. To truly grasp China's global leverage, we've got to talk about rare earth minerals. Now, these aren't just fancy rocks. They are the absolute fundamental building blocks of almost all next-generation commercial and military technology. Think about your everyday life for a second. The screen on the smartphone you might be holding right now, the incredibly powerful magnets inside the motor of an EV, or even the advanced targeting systems in modern fighter jets. Every single one of those absolutely requires rare earth minerals to function. And here is the number that should really make you pause: 90%. There's this common misconception that China mines all of these minerals out of its own soil. Well, they don't, but they do control a staggering 90% of the global processing and refining capabilities. Let that sink in. That means even if a totally different country pulls the raw material out of the ground in, say, South America or Africa, they almost certainly have to load it onto a ship and send it to China just to make it usable for manufacturing. Geopolitical expert Dr. Samir Saran actually uses a totally perfect analogy to describe this setup. He says, China is the beauty salon of rare earths. It's great, right? The raw, ugly, unrefined earth from all over the globe travels to China's massive industrial beauty salon to get refined, processed, and polished. In this dynamic, it creates a massive, almost unprecedented global dependency where just one single nation holds the keys to the factories of the future. Let's flip the script and look at Section 3, India's multi-alignment and growth. Instead of trying to beat China at its own manufacturing game, India is taking a highly unique counterpath. Right now, New Delhi is executing what's called a multi-alignment strategy. So rather than locking into rigid Cold War-style alliances where you have to pick one side or the other, India is actively and aggressively diversifying its economic relations. They're deepening tech ties with the US and Singapore, while simultaneously maintaining energy trade and dialogues across the global south. India is leaning hard into this supreme flexibility. And honestly,
This diplomatic agility is exactly what's positioning it as the fastest-growing large economy in the world today. At the very core of this economic explosion is a distinctly modern asset. There's a saying going around New Delhi these days: our data is someone else's GDP growth, someone else's national security. With a massive, young, and hyper-connected population, India generates an ocean of data. Historically, this data just fueled the digital growth of foreign tech platforms. But India is waking up fast to the staggering value of its own digital sovereignty, and they're actively starting to build walls around it. India is now taking its incredible 1.4 billion population scale and using it to build state-backed digital public infrastructure, or DPI. We're talking about incredibly seamless systems like UPI for payments or the Aadhaar Digital ID program. Just to give you an idea of the scale here, UPI has totally transformed daily life in India. Today, you can literally buy a cup of tea from a tiny street food vendor just by scanning a QR code with your phone. It's everywhere. India's master plan is to use this tech to solve its own immense internal challenges in healthcare, finance, and education first. And then, step onto the world stage not as a military conqueror, but as a global development solutions provider, exporting these proven scalable digital blueprints to other developing nations. Okay, Section 4, the sovereign AI race. Realizing just how valuable all this data is brings us directly into the next critical battleground. $5.5 billion. That is a massive amount of capital, and it represents what's been raised by India's sovereign AI sector across roughly 1,700 different domestic firms. The government's flagship India AI mission views artificial intelligence as way more than just another piece of business software. To them, it's a vital nation-building mechanism. It's meant to bridge internal inequality gaps and actually build native technological capacity completely from the ground up. But wait, here's a pretty stark reality check. 38,000. That is the number of GPUs, graphics processing units, that are currently powering the India AI mission's computing facility. The catch here? Every single one of them is supplied by American firms. This highlights a really persistent, really critical infrastructure dependency. Even though India absolutely has the massive data pools and a brilliant base of engineering talent, it still heavily relies on foreign-supplied hardware and cloud computing to actually train these AI systems. So to break this dependency, India is aggressively pursuing its own sovereign foundation models. Think of projects like Sarvam AI and Bharat Gen. The goal here is twofold. First, they want to tightly secure the national data infrastructure so it simply isn't reliant on foreign servers. And second, they need to serve their incredibly diverse population in their native languages. We have to remember, this is a massive demographic that is largely left behind by the leading Western AI models, which are almost entirely trained on English data. It's a huge gap India intends to fill themselves. Section 5. Future of the Global Order. Let's zoom out and see how these two competing models will actually shape our multipolar future. We're basically looking at a tale of two distinct paths for the developing world right now. On one side, you have China's model, building physical dependency, cornering manufacturing scale, and acting as this massive infrastructure superpower. It's all about cement, steel, and shipping lanes. Then, on the other side, you've got India's vision, leveraging its immense demographic scale and digital innovations to become a development superpower. This is very much a software-driven approach. They want to export healthcare, financial tech, and humanitarian solutions to the rest of the developing world, importantly, without the heavy burden of unpayable debt. And all of this is playing out against the backdrop of a highly multipolar reality. We're actively watching the decline of strict unipolarity and the rapid rise of flexible, issue-based coalitions. Think of groups like BRICS or the Quad. Meanwhile, massive economic blocs like ASEAN are strictly maintaining non-alignment just to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. So the future? It's going to be defined by what experts call procreative partnerships. A great example is France and India recently collaborating on AI for cardiac surgery. It's going to be all about joint technology governance and fixing specific human problems, rather than drawing rigid lines in the sand for traditional Cold War-style blocks. Finally, Section 6, Lessons for the Next Decade. So what does all this mean in practice? Let's get into the actionable takeaways. First up, decision makers have got to urgently diversify their critical mineral supply chains away from single-source dependencies. We simply cannot rely on just one beauty salon for the entire world's future tech. Second, investors should be actively aligning their capital with India's rapidly expanding green energy and AI sectors. They are poised for absolutely exponential growth. And finally, on a policy level, nations and multinational businesses alike really need to embrace multi-alignment diplomacy. Everyone has to learn how to smoothly navigate and partner across overlapping spheres of influence without constantly demanding exclusivity. We're looking toward a very specific horizon here. Keep your eyes on the year 2036. Researchers project that if India successfully executes its strategy, meaning they build out domestic high-value manufacturing, advance their military capacity, and manage to scale their digital public infrastructure globally, they aim to completely balance out their currently very one-sided trade dynamic with China by 2036. This next decade is arguably the most critical transition period in modern economic history. Which leaves us with a huge, provocative question to wrap up this explainer. As the global balance of power undeniably shifts, whose blueprint is ultimately going to shape the future of the developing world? Will the cities of the global south be built on the concrete of China's physical infrastructure, or will they run on the code of India's digital solutions? It's a fascinating thing to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you.